I think the quote we see here is something we're all familiar with, or at least the song is a song everybody knows, and we have related to it at least once in our operational lives. Yesterday always seems easier, but why is that? Well, because from the perspective of now, so today, yesterday already happened. We already have all the information we need. We know exactly how the weather was, how many of our employees called in sick. We know everything. What's scary is the future and the uncertainty of it, right? So there can be the weather, the workload. So for example, how many guests will visit our restaurant, how many of our employees will be calling in sick, or the general availability, how much revenue we will be generating. All of those things are variables outside of our immediate view. And running a restaurant would be much easier if I already knew all of those things, right? But unfortunately, I don't, or at least not for now, because what if we told you that you can use the certainties of yesterday and turn them into like information, insights on how the future will be or for what lies ahead. So that the cloudiness of the future or of tomorrow feels, well, more sunny. So the question behind the how of this, how we can turn the certainties of yesterday into information about what lies ahead, is what we've been busy with for the past month, and what we would like to show you today, specifically how we can use AI in workforce management to make better decisions, be more efficient, and create better schedules. I'm Alina. I'm responsible for the implementation consultants at Dyflexis. My team accompanies the customers we have from the onboarding phase all the way up until the first months of using our system. And so therefore we're usually the ones that are the closest to the customer and really experience their daily operational struggles.
And my name is Jort, and I work for Dyflexis as a data scientist and AI engineer, which means that I'm part of the team where we build and maintain the algorithms that we're going to talk about today.
So let me first give you a bit of a background on what Dyflexis is or who we are. We are a Dutch-born company headquartered in The Hague, been around for 15 years, and we developed the software in workforce management. I think most people here know what workforce management is, but just to give a quick introduction of like the core of our software, it's about a flow that basically starts from employee management, so that would be employee contracts, availabilities, all that type of data, and using that to create schedules, for example. Schedules is usually one thing, it's the ideal world, but then the reality often looks different. People do overtime, etc. So that's where the time registration comes in. Time registration, meaning employees clock in and out. Maybe they're sick, they have to register that they're on holidays. Maybe they work at night and get a certain allowance. All of that data is something we gather in our software and then make available for payroll afterwards. We have 4,600 customers, mainly in the Netherlands, but also in Germany and international. More than 1 million daily users, and most of those users actually work in non-desk industries. Some of them you can see here. So that is really the industries or the companies that have the most uncertainty, not the typical 9-to-5 schedule, but really a lot of volatility. And that's also where our strength lies and what we really focus on. You can also kind of summarize that as having the right people at the right place at the right time. So that's really what we are aiming to assist with. And especially that part is something that I noticed when working with our customers really happens manually. So if you look at the department managers who usually do that job, they're really puzzling availabilities of their employees with more or less accurately forecasted demands and kind of try to build a schedule based on that. And also what I noticed is that most of the time the department managers don't really enjoy that part of the job. They would much rather be on the floor actually helping out and managing, rather than sitting in an office creating schedules. And so that is where we come in and where we've been thinking about how can we actually help and assist with that. And for that we have to ask ourselves, what is the optimal schedule, right? So how does a department manager, for example, make that decision? How does he consider all these factors, or she, about different availabilities, revenue, demand, all of those things? And how does that look like? Because on paper it's just a simple schedule, but it's much more than that, of course. So that's also why we need AI to help us with this. To break it down a bit more, I would like to introduce you to a customer of ours, My Jewelry. Angelique, who is the owner of My Jewelry, is now busy planning for April and May. What is on her mind when doing that? So she would be looking at seasonalities. That can be now, for example, the shift from spring to summer. How does that change shopper behavior? Maybe the Easter weekend, May holidays, how does that change the flow of the store? But also internal pressures. So that can be certain targets that she maybe has, productivity margins, revenue goals, anything like that. And then also the employees, so their availability, but also different costs per employee. Those are a lot of factors to take into account when making a schedule. And so there are so many ways to combine this, or actually that is also the question that we have, is how many ways are there to make a schedule? Let's say Angelique wants to make a schedule for the next week, 7 days. How many different combination possibilities are there when you try to consider different shift lengths? We don't want people coming in for only 15 minutes. We want them to have a break in between, all of those things. And that is actually a question I would like to ask you. We have done the math, but Jörg will get into that later.
Yes.
I would like to hear some guesses. How many combination possibilities do you think there are to make a schedule like that? The closest guess gets chocolate.
Just a ballpark estimate.
Yes.
Anyone?
7? 7, nice. Anyone else? 20? Okay. 47, all right. Anyone else? 64, we're getting higher and higher. All right.
All right. Can I take over the clicker?
Yes, of course.
Thanks. So how many ways are there to make a reasonable schedule? Just to get a flavor of how complex the issue of creating a schedule actually is, how large is this space of solutions that we are looking for a solution in? Let's work out a simple example together. So let's say that Angelique opens the shop at 7 and closes at 8 in the evening. So let's say it's a shopping night. And at all times, she wants to have 5 people on the floor available working the department to help the customers, right? You can already imagine that there's a lot of possible combinations that you can make to puzzle together the shifts to cover this demand. And then next, let's say that we have 20 employees available to actually work these shifts. We sat down to do the math and calculate how many options are there really. And it turns out that there is a quadrillion possible ways to make the schedule. So who was closest?
Thank you.
All right, congrats. And remember, this was just a very simple example and still focused on just needing 5 employees working the department and for a single day. So why would we stop here? Let's extend this hypothetical situation to 7 days. And then it turns out that the scale of this problem is a 1 with 60 zeros. I think this is beyond our understanding. A 1 with 18 zeros, that is the number of grains of sand on Earth. And now we're already at the scale of 60 zeros. Just the number of ways that she has to make the schedule. And if we can scale it even further, now let's say we're not scheduling for a single department, but let's say that we are scheduling for 3 departments at the same time, which is still, again, a very realistic example, I think. Well, I think you get the point. The number of possible ways to create a schedule explodes. And the actual answer here is a 1 with 180 zeros. Well, now that we have this information, now that we know, even for simple examples, how complex the issue really is, how many options there really are. If you sit down to build a schedule manually, how confident are we still that we are actually picking the right one? That the schedule that we built manually is actually the optimal schedule that we could pick out of these gazillion options. And to make sure that we don't always feel like this, that is where our AI solution comes in. So the solution that we have built is basically an AI assistant that helps during the flow of creating the schedule. And what we will talk you through today is how we fill this gap, going from historical workload data to finally an automatically generated schedule. And this historical workload data, well, it could be anything. It really depends on your business what expresses your workload. But for this example of Angelique that Alina was talking about, this could be, for example, the number of guests that visited the shop. It could be the number of transactions or the number of items sold. These kinds of data are very telling of how busy it is, how many work really needs to be done. And the first step in this flow is what we call forecasting the demand. So we're taking this historical workload data and we are going to build models for it to predict it towards the future. And we're doing this in two ways at the same time. The first way is to analyze and profile how demand is typically spread out during a day, but we're also looking for patterns across days to find, for example, patterns that correlate with the weather, or to find seasonal patterns. And very specifically, this modeling is done based on seasonality, day of the week, weather information, but also information like national holidays and school vacations can be data sources that are very telling of how much work needs to be done. And to highlight a few more things about this software is that there is a specific AI model trained on this workload data. So it's very different from using a general purpose model like, say, ChatGPT, where you go and you ask, how many visitors am I going to get tomorrow? This is very different. This is a very specific model trained on your data and hence optimized to do forecasts for your business. And also important to highlight is that these forecasts are recalculated every night. Because you can imagine if it, for example, bases its decisions on the weather information and the weather forecast is being updated now and then we also want to take this into account in our forecasts. So the forecasts are being updated every night. And finally, it adapts and learns from live data. Because on this graph, this line is today, everything on the left is the historical realized data, and everything on the right is what we want to forecast, what we want to know. But as the line progresses, as time passes, we get more and more of this realized data. Our history increases, and all of this data is then being taken into account so that the model can adapt in case the nature of your business changes. So with this first step, with the demand forecasting, we have gone from this historical workload data to a predicted future workload. And mind you that in this example of Angelique, this is then still expressed in how many visitors am I going to get tomorrow at a certain time, for example. And now the next step is to actually fit this to the capacity norms of a specific business, to specify rules of calculation to say, if it is in this busyness scenario, how many employees do I actually need in which departments? And with this module, we can translate this forecasted demand to the desired capacity. And this desired capacity could, for example, look something like this. It expresses over time, how many people do I need in this department? And with this kind of data, I don't need to think about, can I puzzle together shifts? What is the minimal shift length? Is my employee available? Something like that. All I need to care about is, in the ideal world, how many people would I need? And now that we have this desired capacity, the next step is to puzzle together shifts to actually try to cover this desired capacity. And of course, we could do this manually, but the next step in our flow is to, is what we call shift create, automatic shift creation, which is done based on this desired capacity as a target. That's what we try to match, while we take into account the minimal length of shifts and the maximal length of shifts that they can be. And we also take into account start and end times of specific departments, of shifts, or of schedules as a whole. So it's still very configurable while creating these shifts in an automatic way. And with this, we are closing the gap even further. We've now gone from this desired capacity to a collection of open shifts. So these shifts are still open, they're still unassigned, and that is the final gap that we're going to fill. We take the open shifts that we have and we assign names to it. And of course, we could do this manually again, But this is also where our AI will assist you, and it will automatically assign the shifts while taking many things into account, like contract information, contract hours, contract days, availability and unavailability, where if someone is unavailable, they might have a dentist appointment and they will never be scheduled. And if someone is, for example, explicitly available, this can be taken into account as a preference of when does this employee want to work. Also, leave is taken into account, like registered holidays or long-term sick leave. Labels are automatically taken into account. And labels is a very broad term, but that's also, I think, the power in this context of these labels. Because we can assign labels to employees and we can assign labels to the timeline. So you can imagine that if you are scheduling morning shifts, you always have in your mind, right, I need one person who owns a key because, well, someone needs to open the door, right? We can assign labels to the employees and to the timeline and it will match this. Another use case would be, for example, if you want to have someone with first responder skills on the floor at all times. This is something that we can take into account automatically with these labels. Also, business-specific configurations are taken into account. Costs, if that is something that you want to prioritize. And finally, skills, because it's also important that you schedule someone in a department that's actually able to work in a certain department. And with this final step, which we call shift assign, we are closing the gap from these open shifts to the final schedule. And now we have basically completed our flow. So what we have achieved is step by step, we have automated the process of creating a schedule for your workforce while keeping you as a user in the driver's seat. Because it's not like the AI is completely taking over, everything is configurable and everything is monitorable. And also, one final thing that I would like to mention is that it's a very modular approach. So it's 4 separate units. And if, for example, you already have your own BI software that creates some demand forecast for you, you don't have to use the first part, you can still use the flow from there. So it's a very modular approach. And with this, we have created an automatically generated optimal schedule based on true availability, data, and talent.
Thank you. Yeah, so Jort was already touching upon some of the points, but we would like to highlight some of the things of the AI. It's a process optimization, right? So not an autopilot. You still make your own decisions. The planners know their employees best. They know exactly who to put when. It is an assistant, it is a foundation that you can then use to build upon. So you can always make changes, adjust it, and maybe even try to beat the AI in making the best schedule. It is not a traditional language model, so it is really based on your historical data, not based on the general weather, how it will be or how restaurants will be doing in the next year, but it's really based on your data. So if you have certain events that keep repeating, the AI will pick up on that, and if the events happen again, it will also see that. And last but not least, what Jort was already showing is it's a modular tool. It's really plug and play. If you indeed already have your forecasting done somewhere else and you already know the amount of people you need, but you would now also like to automate how they go into the schedule, then you can also step in a bit later and push that via API basically to the software and build your schedule based on that. Or you do the whole process, it's fully up to you. Essentially, our vision with the tool is really to bring time back to the non-desk sector so that people can focus on what matters most to them, which is, well, their people. Yes. All right. Thank you. That was it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you all.